So let's simply move through the poem stanza by stanza and see how we can trace some of these major themes in the poem. The opening stanza emphasizes sensual pleasures, the sensual pleasures that the female character in the poem is enjoying. She's enjoying late coffee and oranges in a sunny chair. There's the visual pleasures of the green freedom of a cockatoo on a rug. But that's contrasted to the dreaming of religion, which is associated with language like that old catastrophe and some procession of the dead. And of course, we can connect this to the idea that perhaps this poem is taking place on a Sunday morning, and the woman's sort of enjoyment of these sensual pleasures seems to exist in some tension with the idea that she ought to be engaging in some kind of religious practice. Stanza 2 starts to advance the argument that divinity, that kind of holy or godlike quality, is not something that is found external to humanity, but within humanity. Divinity, the speaker says, must live within herself. Stanza 3 begins with reference to Jove, the leader of the Roman gods, also known as Zeus in Greek mythology, of course. Stephens, interestingly, uses this reference to the gods by talking about the gods as inhuman, as beings who are completely distant from our human experience. He then imagines a commingling of human and divine blood, which of course happens quite frequently in Greek and Roman mythology as the gods have children with human beings. Using this image, Stephens imagines the inhuman gods mixing with humanity in a way that seems to humanize the idea of divinity. So we get the idea of the sky being much friendlier than the now when human and divine blood mix, in contrast to the dividing and indifferent blue that the sky currently represents, as it represents the gods in their current nature. Stanza 4 begins to shift the balance of power between the human and the divine, suggesting as it does that remembrance, her remembrance of awakened birds, or endures longer than the prophecy or chimera of religion. Not any haunt of prophecy, nor any old chimera of the grave will endure like her remembrance of awakened birds. So memory comes to take on a greater power than religion. In stanza 5, the main character, the female character, questions or challenges this idea that the speaker is advancing. She expresses a desire for immortality. She says, in contentment, even though she enjoys the pleasures of life, the pleasures of memory, she says, I still feel the need of some imperishable bliss. Even in these sensual pleasures, I still feel a need for something beyond that. The speaker's rather stark response is that death is the mother of beauty. Now, what the speaker seems to mean by this is that the idea is that death is the mother of beauty. The idea that things come to an end is the source of our idea of what is beautiful. And the speaker will expand on this idea in stanza 6. Stanza 6 imagines heaven, paradise, as a place of a kind of stasis. Is there no change of death in paradise? Does ripe fruit never fall? Heaven or paradise is imagined here as an unchanging place, and a place that is in fact quite boring, a place in which no desire is ever fulfilled, in which fruit simply hangs on the branch without ever being plucked or eaten. We might compare this stanza to John Keats's famous romantic poem Ode on a Grecian Urn, where Keats similarly imagines a scene of Stasis looking at a Greek urn, the scene carved on a Greek urn. He sees these figures who are frozen in space, a lover about to embrace his beloved, but never quite able to complete the embrace because he's been frozen in this artistic picture. Keats refers to this as a cold pastoral. And I think Stevens here is doing a variation on Keats's idea by suggesting that heaven is a kind of unchanging, frozen scene. And in contrast to the vibrancy of mortal human life, which he treats in the final two stanzas. Stanza 7 features this rather striking image of a ring of men who chant in orgy on a summer morn. Now, what Stevens seems to be imagining here, and I think here we can also see a link between what Stevens does and what anthropologically minded writers like Wharton and Eliot also do, is saying, well, perhaps religion doesn't actually emanate from on high, from a divine source. Perhaps it actually comes from a human source. And what he seems to imagine here is a kind of cult-like scene of sun worship, where this ring of men shout their boisterous devotion to the sun, and that this seems to create the very idea of divinity, not as a god, but as a god might be, naked among them like a savage source. This would seem to be the savage source, or the human source, of religion itself. Now, if that's a kind of primitive idea of where religion comes from, the final stanza really brings this home to the Christian tradition, which is the major tradition that Stevens is seeking to confront. The voice that cries, "The tomb in Palestine is not the porch of spirits lingering, it is the grave of Jesus where he lay," emphasizes that the major trait of Jesus Christ is not that he was divine, but that he was mortal, that he was a man who was born and died. And this indeed is what Stevens wants to emphasize in the Christian tradition, is the idea that not that it is a kind of abstract divinity, but that it is a way of humanizing divinity, of finding the divine in the human experience. And the image that we end with the casual flocks of pigeons making ambiguous undulations as they sink downward to darkness on extended wings, suggests both this kind of mortality, the flocks of pigeons sinking downward to darkness, but also the ambiguous undulations, the sense of that we don't know what the meaning of that life is, that it isn't predetermined, but that is part of its energy, that is part of its pleasure, the kind of mystery that it embodies.